Good evening. I'm Dr. Jolene Webster. I'm Minister of Word and Service and Director of Music Ministries at UUMC. As a performing arts aficionado, I'm also very enthusiastically interested in the visual art. In the late 1980s, right after graduate school, I worked at the Kimball Art Museum in the curatorial department for European and Asian art. Somewhere along my journey, I was asked to lead a book study on a devotional treatise by Dutch Catholic priest and Yale and Harvard theology professor Henri Nouwen, or as we say in America, Henry Nouwen. The book is The Return of the Prodigal Son, a story of homecoming. That's my original one that my guest is showing. I've lost mine and bought probably 12 different books along the way. And now there's actually an anniversary edition now as well. The book is The Return of the Prodigal Son. It's the story of homecoming, and home is on everyone's mind now. For one thing, we're spending a lot of time in our homes. But the book is a sort of spiritual treatise on the depiction of Rembrandt's famous painting. Here's my photograph of it that hangs in the Hermitage in St. Petersburg, Russia. So in tonight's fireside chat, I'm really honored and excited to be joined by Dr. Jeff Smith, who will discuss with us the details of this painting and Nouwen's book, a devotional book as well. So let me introduce to everyone Dr. Jeff Smith. Jeff is professor and holder of the Key Fortson Chair in the Department of Art and Art History at the University of Texas, Austin, where he's taught since the fall of 1979. His classes and publications focus on the art of Northern Europe between about 1350 and 1700. He and his wife Sandy became members of UUMC and the Explorers class in the mid-1990s. I consider them both my friends and have bumped into them at conferences in other cities such as New Orleans and even in hospital waiting rooms. I've enjoyed participating in their homeroom and have even attended special event lectures that Jeff has hosted at UT, as well as asking his expert opinion on Renaissance art, particularly depictions of Martin Luther and Philip Melanchthon. So hello, Jeff, and welcome. We're so glad you're here, and thank you for volunteering to do this. Thank you so much for allowing me to draft you to do this. I'm super excited about it. And I know everyone's interested in what you'll share about Rembrandt and this marvelous painting. So I'll turn the talk over to you, and if any organic questions present themselves, I'll be sure to ask your opinion.
Okay, thank you, Jolene. Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Let me get the share screen. Okay. I'm delighted to talk about Rembrandt. Some of you, particularly those in the Explorers class, have heard me talk about this artist on various different occasions. I was really trained as a medievalist, and I sort of have been working my way up through the centuries. But one artist who I focus on in several of my classes, graduate seminars, undergraduate classes, is Rembrandt, because I find him tremendously fascinating. Somebody who is young, brash, challenging the world, sort of dissing, if you can use that word in the 17th century, dissing other artists, not only in the Netherlands where he lived, but also artists from other traditions like the Italian tradition. So somebody who really wanted to make his mark in the world. But his career was a fairly long one by the standards of the 17th century. Born in 1606, he would die at the age of 63 in 1669, which put him longer than the average person in terms of the length of his life. But his career was one of tremendous successes. He's probably the most famous 17th century artist from Northern Europe, maybe from all of Europe. But he's also somebody who had tremendous personal challenges as well. His early works tend to be big, bold, brash things. But due to the loss of his first wife, loss of children, loss of his second common law wife, loss of his only son, as he got more mature, his paintings became quieter and quieter and more introspective. And I hate to say that sometimes he even has a feminist view on things, but he takes some stories like Lucretia or the story of Bathsheba and looks at it from their eyes, their point of view, in a way that you cannot find much else in the 17th century. So what I often tell my students is he shows you the externals, but he also sort of peers in or maybe peels open the minds of some of the figures in his compositions. Now, the painting I want to talk about tonight is Return of the Prodigal Son. And as Jolene mentioned, it's in the Hermitage Museum in St. Petersburg. It dates late in his career, anywhere between 65 and 69. It's a big picture. I'll give you a painting view of its scale a little bit later on, but it's about 8 feet tall and about 6 feet wide. So these figures are life-size or just slightly over life-size in scale. We have no idea who it was painted for. We have little idea about its early provenance or history. Catherine the Great acquired it for her personal collection in the 18th century, and so it's been in Russia since that time. It is one of numerous paintings by Rembrandt that they have in the Hermitage Museum. He was a favorite of hers and also some of the later imperial collectors. But looking at this, the story comes from Luke 15:11 to 32, the parables. I know that some of us have been talking about parables in our Explorers class the last few weeks, stories that Jesus told that were recounted by others that tell something sometimes on one level, but often on a deeper, more spiritual level as well. And this is a story about basically three protagonists: the father, the younger son, and the older son. And in this case, you can see the father, the younger son, and the figure that's usually identified as the older son. But then we have three servants tucked in the shadows back here, a little bit more visible, a little bit more brightly illuminated. And I asked my students, well, where are you? Where are you situated in this picture? We're really around the front side. So we might see we are a counterpart to the figure here. So we're proximate, we're close up. So we really get a good view of all three of their faces. Well, the story in brief synopsis goes that the younger son, tired of living at home, asked his father sort of an impossible question. He says, "Dad, give me my half of the inheritance. I want to leave." Now, we're about to start a new semester at UT, and I'm sure a lot of students at home, particularly after COVID, want to be gone and be away from their family for a bit of time, but eventually, hopefully, they'll go back like the younger son did in this instance. But both biblically and even today, if you say to your father, "I want half my inheritance," you're basically saying die. And you're also saying you don't care about the family any longer. Something has upset you terribly, or you think the grass is going to be greener elsewhere. And that's part of the parable's message, that it probably isn't. So the story goes that father reluctantly gave him half, which would have been almost impossible in the cultural situation at that point in time. He goes off and spends the money on wine, women, and song. Artists, including Rembrandt, in one of a great self-portrait with his new wife, Saskia, from about 1636, played the role of Rembrandt as the prodigal son and Saskia as a prostitute sitting on his lap. It's a great painting that's in Dresden today. So, the idea of playing these stories out is something that Rembrandt would do, and sometimes with a whimsical side as well. But the younger son spends all his money. He gets tossed out of the houses of prostitution. He eventually finds a farmer who allows him to tend his pigs for a bit of time. And son comes to the realization, I'm starving. Even my father's lowest servants are treated better than I am right now. The pigs eat better than I am. So swallowing his pride, the son returns to the father. Now, Rembrandt here really compresses the story. You often have to do this. If you have a fairly long, in this case, proverb, you have to bring different elements together. Luke tells us the father saw the son off at a distance, and the father went running towards him. Again, in terms of parental decorum at that point in time, that would have been very difficult, but it's part of the story. And the son comes, and this is the moment that Rembrandt chooses to focus on here. The older son was out in the field somewhere, so he doesn't come until a little bit later on. We'll return to that part of the story as well. But I want to look at the picture a little bit more carefully without all the text. We have basically 6 protagonists, not including you. We're in the front. You might look at this and think, okay, what is Rembrandt doing with color? What is Rembrandt doing with light? We see the light shines on the father's face, shines on the bald or shaved head of his son, upon the hands in the back right here, and on the feet. We'll come back to them. Shines on the older brother's face, and on his hands as well, and only very, very secondary, tertiary on the figures immediately behind. Now, most artists, including Rembrandt, quite often will put the major subject right smack in the central point. I usually talk about this as the axis of meaning, where whatever you want to be most important would be right here in the composition. Well, he divides the composition. We really have one grouping here and maybe another grouping over on this side. Let's look at some of the details of this. We'll come back to the whole in a bit. Now, Rembrandt had dealt with this theme in various ways early on. Here's an etching from 1636, the same year he did that painting with Saskia sitting on his lap. And we see the father greeting the son, who in this case still has long hair and a long sort of unkempt beard. He's barefoot, he's got a walking stick. The father's already yelled to the servants, bring him a cloak and shoes and things like that. And so they're preparing, they're surprised by this. They're opening the shutter of the window, peering down here as well. And Rembrandt actually puts himself right in the middle of this. He wants you to see, okay, father, son, and Rembrandt. So he's telling you the story, but he never wants you to forget who's making this. So he signs and he dates it, in this case, 1636 in this particular image. Now, this is a late work by Rembrandt. Early on, he often would paint in a relatively detailed or meticulous, or what they referred to in the 17th century as a smooth fashion. But he abandons that later on as his style becomes much freer, much looser. Frans Hals did this as well at this point in time. Rubens sometimes. It really almost anticipates what you find in 19th century French painting and the debate about smooth or rough that you find at that moment in time. But by creating a rough style, as you see in the father's face here, it really draws us to him. I think it brings him alive a lot more than a fully, a full likeness, portrait likeness would as well. You also see how he's painted paint on paint on paint, thick impasto that builds up. He sometimes will sculpt with paint. By that I mean, if you look sideways at some of his pictures that haven't been rolled up too much over the centuries, Aristotle contemplating the bust of Homer at the Metropolitan Museum is a good example, although it's lost some of its surface. Sometimes you see it really has a three-dimensional texture where paint can cast even a little bit of shadow. But in this case, it brings the face out. And you notice in passages like right here, the artist has actually used the wooden butt of the brush and scraped into the paint to sort of make it rougher feeling. But what do we see? How do we respond to the father's face in this case? His eyes are slightly open. The story tells you the father was just overjoyed. His lost son has been found. So he's looking down, he's thinking, and again, Rembrandt, we don't know exactly what the father's thinking, and that's part of the brilliance of Rembrandt. But you have some idea that he's overjoyed. All those tough questions like, what did you do with my money? Where have you been? Who have you been with? And such. That'll be postponed to a little bit later on. But the sense of compassion, I think that's what strikes people most about this picture, because you do have this wonderfully compassionate expression on the father's face. As we see over on the left-hand side, the hands coming around. I'll give you a detail in just a bit. But we see the son at his absolute lowest. His head is shaved, which again, during that period said you were a leper or somebody at the lowest levels or dregs of society. His clothing, which might have once been quite rich, is all torn. There's between the hand, there's a rip in the shoulder right there. His shoes, his sandals, this one's broken, this one's off as well. You can see his feet have little bruises on them as well. So he's reached the lowest possibility. But he came to that recognition while tending pigs in a far off land that even my father's servants have better than I have right now. And he goes home and says, I am no longer your son. Basically, please hire me. And the father won't, hear of it. You are my son. But it's the gesture here that I find so powerful. Because what did the father do? Again, all those conversations, all those tricky questions will probably happen later. But the father puts his hands on the shoulders, lightly pulls the body back towards the body that made him. The son, exhausted, rests his head against the father's chest. And it's just, I'm home. We still see him mostly in the shadow right here, but the sense of relief, I think, maybe we read too much into it, but I think it's palpable. I think it's a picture where you're seeing somebody who's reached the lowest, level and has come home, and it's just, whatever happens next has to be better than what it has before. And he seems obviously to be contrite. And again, that'll be a discussion for a little bit later on. Now, notice the father's dressed in red and the son has sort of this yellowish or golden robe on. Keep that in mind. Details, we look at the feet. In this case, we see the shoe is off and you see the bruise or the cut on the foot itself. But again, notice how even with a few brush strokes, an outlining of the foot, a few brush strokes give you that sense of three-dimensionality, that sense of texture as well. And how it's handled. So you feel like this foot is actually jumping out at you with almost a little bit of foreshortening or perspective. Looking at the son in this case, we see hands, and some people have talked a lot about, one hand looks female, one hand looks male. I'll leave that up to your opinion in this instance, but it's the hands that protect, the hands that guide. Those of you who have been parents or grandparents or close friends of others, there's always some occasion where the child is crying and you put the hands on the shoulder and comfort him down. This is exactly what Rembrandt's doing. And keep in mind, this is a time where his life, he's had to move. He's gone through bankruptcy in 1656, so about a decade earlier, living in a much smaller house, still has financial woes. His common law wife has probably died at this point in time, and his only son would die a couple of years after this. And so, his personal life is an upheaval. He's probably not as healthy as he was once early on, but the sense of relief that you find here. Well, this is a story, this is a narrative, and it has other protagonists. Just look at the figure of the older brother for a minute. See if you can figure out what Rembrandt's telling you about him, or maybe what you can read into his expression. First, how is he dressed? Well, he has a nice robe on as well. He's got a walking staff. Same color, red robe that his father has. So coloristically, it links older son with the father itself. Hair bound up with a long beard, hair bound up with a long beard, light striking the face, light striking the face. But contrast the brother's body language. Head is tipping downwards. Is he looking at his younger brother and going, hello, Bubba? Is he saying, welcome back? I don't think so. And Rembrandt, showing him in profile, as opposed to the more full-faced or three-quarters view that you find here, we can only see part of his expression. In fact, his mouth is largely obscured. I just see it red right there, largely obscured by his mustache and his beard. But then look at his hands. Look at how the cloak is wrapped up around him, and only the hands are exposed right there. Right hand is clasping the left hand. So his hands contrast with the open pose that you find in the father in this instance. The father is bending over. He's bolt upright, except for a slight tilt to the head. And you might think about what's going on in his mind. Well, going back to Luke and to the parable, the son, when he approaches the house, hears all this noise, and the feast has already started. And he's going, what's going on? Why is there a feast? And the father tells him, your younger brother who was lost has been found. And the older son is not real happy, because he basically says, Dad, I have done everything right for as long as you've asked me to, and you have never sacrificed the fatted lamb for me and my friends. I've done everything dutifully. I didn't go off and waste half the money and such. You may be thinking, okay, other son's back. His half of the inheritance is now going to be halved again, and so he won't get as much as he would otherwise if you want to put it on a material level. So he has to work through some issues at this point in time. I think all these figures are working through things, whether it's us as spectators, trying to understand the dynamics of what's going on, the family relationships between these three figures, and again, bisect the composition, these two on one side, the older brother on the other side. He's actually not even on the same ground level as them. He's up a little bit, like up a step right here, as if he's just coming in from our right-hand side. Again, his face and hands are illuminated, as are face and hands of the father, at least part of the face of the younger son, maybe face and feet in this instance. So we have this dynamics going on, but Rembrandt brilliantly here and many other works leaves it up to you to try to piece together things. A good painting is what I call an open-ended picture. It allows you to tell stories. It allows you to have, and I often use the word a conversation piece, because it allows you to have a dialogue with somebody like perhaps myself and Jolene in this instance, a dialogue about a picture and what the story means. And we might not all interpret this in exactly the same way. And I've had some students say, well, if I was the older brother, I'd be really, really angry. And other people might say, no, the younger brother was headstrong, and the older brother will get over it. And we simply don't know. But then when you bring, yeah?
Sorry.
That's okay.
I am just really intrigued by something that you brought up, and we all have our connections to different things that speak to us. But I think as a musical director, a conductor, this idea of hands, facial expression, and body language are real important to me and really speak to me. And I was one of those people who, like now, and thought of a feminine and a masculine hand. So I'm glad to hear you mention
that's fine. It may be true. I don't know.
Either one of us from the father, but also the hands of the brother seem definitely tense, don't they? Or and the look on the face seems a little condescending with the arch of the brow and the downward gaze. So I just think those ideas you've brought forth about the light on the face, of course, the clothing and the body posture, and the hands. I think the hands are very telling. So hands, face, and body. I'm just so glad that you brought those out, because to me, those really, really speak to Luke's narrative, as you mentioned, of the prodigal son story. So I'm just enjoying this, and thank you for mentioning those three elements in particular.
I mentioned at the outset that I'd show you an image of it in the Hermitage Museum. It's a beautiful building. You have the old Hermitage and the new Hermitage. It was an imperial palace. Obviously, it's been a museum for a long time, especially since the early 20th century. But you get some sense of the scale of this picture. And also, it's not always quite as dark as the reproduction show, although, it's had lots of varnish on and been removed or been replaced over the period, over the centuries and such. But it's big enough that you really do have to respond. You're talking about the body language and things like that. Rembrandt, like most artists, sometimes would even act things out in the studio, would go through a story and have studio assistants act things out, trying to understand what the meanings or how you can pull certain meanings out of the tale itself. I happen to like this one because you have a woman instructing three little Russian kids about this picture. I was giving a talk at the National Library of Russia in St. Petersburg in October 2018, and I used the occasion to spend 2 different days in the Hermitage, spending a lot of time with Rembrandt as well. But I came back through late one afternoon, and I happened to see this group of 4 looking up the picture, and I thought, yeah, that's just really sweet, because it is a picture that invites storytelling. It's a picture that invites your engagement. I make I have a little game when I go to museums. What painting or print or sculpture or whatever would I bring home? And in this case, I often say, well, I would, from Hermitage, I, of course, take this picture. But I've said to my UT students, well, if you want to give me one painting and you can get out of the country free without getting in jail, you can bring me this painting. I don't have a wall big enough now for it, but never mind. I'll find someplace in Austin to put this picture. Because to me, it speaks to human nature. To me, it speaks to the tensions that we have with family sometimes petty grievances, desire to get away, but ultimately coming home, being maybe reaccepted by one's family in spite of what one has done. It has a universal element of compassion. And I think this is one reason why this picture appeals so much to me, but also people like Henry Nouwen and Jolene and many others. And I end with just two images. One is a young Rembrandt when he's basically 22, 23 years of age in Leiden, just starting out his career, and an older one from about the same time as the Return of the Prodigal Son picture, painting that's in Kenwood in London today. Rembrandt is an artist holding the tools, his utensils, these two great circles behind, which may refer to a rivalry between two ancient Greek artists. That doesn't concern me, but just, he's aged, he's matured. We all learn life's lessons. And I think Rembrandt, unlike most of us, applies some of the things he has learned to his pictures. And I think that's one reason why Return of the Prodigal Son is, I think, such a powerful, powerful picture for me. Let me go back to Jolene, if you have any questions at this point.
So thank you for letting me pose the one I did. Just organically arising out of what you've said and what I'd read and just thoughts I have of my own, I thought it was really interesting how early on you said that you present to your students and to us, the listeners today, who are your students for the day. Where are we in the picture? And I thought it was really interesting that you mentioned that we're on this perspective looking onward. So we're part of the group, but on this side of the painting. And I've always also wondered, I've always felt that at some point in the story of the prodigal, I've been one character or another. And I think maybe now I might have gotten that idea from him, but sometimes I'm the prodigal son who's done badly and is in need of forgiveness. Sometimes I'm the compassionate parent forgiving, not just my own children, but in life, And sometimes I'm the jealous older brother looking on going, why does that person get that when I'm, when I've been here doing all the hard work? But another idea is I've always wondered about the people lurking in the background. You mentioned that they could be, the workers in the field or the servants or the ones preparing the staff for the party or something. But I've always wondered, is one of those the mother? And where is the mother? Is the mother lurking in the background looking on, or
the biblical parable
in the background too?
The parable doesn't mention the mother at all. So, like once again, the women, including the mother, is left out. I doubt that any of these are I think they're more the servant women and maybe the head servant sitting down because he's more attractively dressed. He's got a hat on as well. His bit of a position of status within the composition. I would love it if the mother was there, but again, the story doesn't tell us anything about her. And women died in childbirth all the time, so she may not even been around. I'm sorry to bring that up. It was very much a point at back then.
Well, your talk was intriguing, as I knew it would be, and it was also delightful. I felt like we've all had the opportunity to be in your classroom tonight. So that was really wonderful. I just want to mention to our UUMC friends, yours and mine, that when I first got the idea of this interview, I called or emailed Jeff and said, would you be willing to do this? And maybe we could come up with a topic, because the topic was Jeff Smith and the topic was art history. And he said, well, I really love this painting by Rembrandt that is The Return of the Prodigal Son. And I told him I'm just so amazed with this coincidence because it also happens to be my favorite painting. And I already had read the book by Nouwen and had this photograph that a friend had taken. And I've just always wanted to learn more and loved and admired this. So I really think that was kind of the spirit moving between us, that you suggested the very thing that that I loved and would have brought up actually if I'd known that was within your realm of expertise. But what a blessing you've been, and lucky us, lucky me to have gotten to learn these things and to share them with our UUMC friends. So thank you so very much on behalf of myself and on behalf of the whole church and all of our friends out there in Facebook world too. So
Thank you, Jolene.
it's a great appreciation. Thank you very much.
Good night, everybody.
Good night and peace be with you.